My husband chose the exact night he was crowned CEO to humiliate me by handing over divorce papers in front of his sneering mother. She laughed openly, as though she were witnessing my complete erasure. So I signed every page without hesitation. They assumed I had given up, but just as he raised his glass in celebration, my phone vibrated with a single message. "Do not leave the room. Dad is on his way." Moments later, the doors burst open. My father, a decorated military officer, stepped inside, flanked by two armed men. "My name is Claire Lopez. I am 38 years old." I was seated in a private, velvet-draped dining room inside the St. Anthony Hotel in San Antonio, a place steeped in old wealth, carrying the scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner. Above us, a crystal chandelier shattered the light into countless sharp prisms, scattering fractured rainbows across the face of my husband, Brent Caldwell. He stood at the head of the long mahogany table, lifting a champagne flute high. His face was flushed with triumph, the kind that only comes from destroying someone else on the way up. The board members of Vanguard Ridge Industries applauded, their claps measured and formal, acknowledging the man who had just been appointed their new CEO. I was the only one who didn't join in. My hands were folded in my lap, crushing a silk napkin so tightly my fingers ached. The applause faded, replaced by the soft clatter of cutlery and low murmurs of congratulation. That was when Brent sat down, angled his body toward me, and shoved a thick manila envelope across the immaculate white tablecloth. It scraped loudly as it slid, slicing through the ambient noise of the room. It came to rest beside my untouched plate of sea bass, kept there only for appearances, for the benefit of the investors watching us. He wore a pleasant smile, but his eyes were empty, cold, predatory, the eyes of a man who believed he had already won. "Open it," he said quietly, loud enough for those closest to hear, soft enough to preserve the illusion of intimacy. I lifted the flap. Inside was a stack of freshly printed legal papers, still warm to the touch. The heading at the top of the first page was impossible to miss. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Beneath it sat a settlement agreement and a non-disclosure clause. I raised my eyes to meet his. He was staring at me with blatant superiority. He had chosen this moment, the height of his success, to dispose of the woman he used as a stepping stone. "Well, go on," Marilyn, my mother-in-law, sneered from across the table. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the room. She wore a dress worth more than my father's yearly pension, and she displayed her cruelty with pride. "Read it," she added, smirking, "unless the vocabulary is beyond you." A few board members laughed uncomfortably, unsure whether they were witnessing family banter or a calculated public humiliation. Marilyn took a slow sip of wine, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. I picked up the papers. I didn't need to read every line to understand what I was holding. I had spent years reviewing risk assessments and dissecting contracts far more complex than this cheap attempt at coercion. I skimmed the critical sections. It was a trap, deliberate, calculated, and vicious. The terms were laughable. I was to receive the marital home, a massive property on the north side of the city, one I knew was buried under 3 separate mortgages. It wasn't a reward. It was a liability, disguised as generosity. A financial sinkhole, waiting to swallow me whole. There was a one-time payment of $50,000, presented as a magnanimous farewell, along with a monthly allowance that wouldn't even be enough to cover the property taxes on the house they were forcing onto me. But the true sting lay in the NDA. In return for accepting this financial disaster, I was expected to surrender my voice forever. I would never be allowed to speak about Vanguard Ridge. I would never be allowed to speak about Brent's leadership. I would never be allowed to mention the irregular practices I had witnessed over the past 10 years. By signing, I was agreeing to disappear. "This is exactly why men need to be cautious," Marilyn declared loudly, projecting her voice across the table. She pointed her fork in my direction. "You give a woman a little access, and suddenly she thinks the place belongs to her. Women need to understand their position. Sometimes they need a reminder of where the exit is. The shame hit me in a burning wave, sharp, suffocating. I could feel the gazes of the elite guests drilling into me. They were watching the CEO's wife be publicly dismantled between the entree and dessert. They were waiting for tears. They were waiting for a breakdown. They were waiting for me to throw a glass or plead for compassion. Brent leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Sign it, Claire. Do it now and we keep this respectable. Push back, and I'll drown you in legal fees until you're sleeping in your car." I studied him, truly studied him. I saw past the arrogance to the insecurity beneath it. I saw the hunger for approval I had been feeding for 18 years. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I reached into my purse and took out my own pen, a solid silver fountain pen my father had given me at my college graduation. I removed the cap. The scratch of the nib against paper was suddenly the loudest sound in the room. I turned to the final page of the settlement and signed my name, Claire Lopez Caldwell. I added the date. Then I turned to the NDA and signed that as well. I signed the waiver. I signed the transfer of the debt-loaded house. I signed every single page, flipping them over with a steady, deliberate rhythm. Silence fell over the table. They were stunned. Marilyn actually stopped chewing. Brent blinked, his smug grin slipping for just a moment before snapping back into place. He believed I was defeated. He believed I had submitted. He believed I was surrendering, like a frightened animal. I capped the pen and returned it to my purse. Then I slid the signed documents back across the table. "There," I said calmly, "it's all yours." Brent grabbed the papers, scanning the signatures as if afraid the moment might vanish. He exhaled, relieved. "Good girl," he said. I stood. The chair screeched loudly against the floor, making two investors flinch. I smoothed my dress. "I'm going to the ladies' room," I said. Brent waved me off without looking, already turning to accept more praise from the man beside him. He had what he wanted. To him, I was no longer human, just a resolved problem. I leaned in, my face near his ear. His expensive cologne filled my senses. A scent I once adored now made my stomach turn. "Brent," I murmured. He tilted his head, irritated. "What?" "You just signed yourself into the most expensive mistake of your life." Before he could react, I straightened and walked away, heels echoing across the parquet floor, spine straight, chin lifted. I never looked back. I could feel Marilyn's stare burning into my back, sharp and relentless. But I didn't turn around. I stepped into the hallway as the heavy double doors shut behind me, muffling the noise of celebration inside. The corridor was deserted, carpeted in thick plush fabric and illuminated by soft golden wall lights. The sudden quiet was almost crushing. I leaned against the wall and released a long, uneven breath. My heart was slamming against my chest like a bird desperate to escape its cage. I had done it. I had set the snare. But now I was alone, and the enormity of what I was facing crashed down on me. I was one woman standing against a corporation, against a family backed by millions of dollars and an absolute absence of conscience. My clutch vibrated. I fumbled for my phone, my hands slightly unsteady as I pulled it free. The screen lit up with a new text from an unfamiliar number. I didn't need to save it to know who it was. I would recognize that concise tone anywhere. "Do not leave the room. Dad is coming." I stared at the message. For a moment, the words blurred. Dad, he was on his way. I checked the timestamp, 1 minute ago. Something inside me shifted. A fierce, icy calm settled into place. My hands stopped shaking. The fear that had been tightening around my throat vanished, replaced by pure resolve. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't the prey here. I slipped the phone back into my bag and glanced at my reflection in a hallway mirror. My lipstick was flawless. My eyes were steady. I turned around and walked back toward the private dining room. I pushed open the double doors. The conversations inside softened as I re-entered. Brent looked up, confusion flickering across his face. He had expected me to disappear, to run, humiliated and broken. Instead, I returned to the table. I pulled out my chair. I sat. I lifted my wine glass and took a slow sip. Meeting Marilyn's gaze over the rim, I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who hears thunder long before the storm reveals itself. I arranged my napkin on my lap, settled in, and waited for the next act to unfold. I drove home alone through the quiet streets, the interior of the car feeling more like a sealed vault than a vehicle. The engine's low hum was steady, calm, nothing like the chaos I had left behind at the hotel. But my heart wasn't racing. I wasn't crying. I didn't clutch the steering wheel until my knuckles burned. I didn't scream into the darkness. Those were the reactions of a woman who was devastated. I wasn't devastated. I was planning. I pulled into the driveway of the massive colonial house on the north side, the same house Brent had so generously handed over to me, bundled neatly with its suffocating debt. I didn't turn on the lights. I crossed the foyer in darkness, my heels clicking against the marble in a steady rhythm. I moved through the space by memory, passing the living room where we once hosted lavish holiday parties, passing the dining room where Marilyn had criticized my table settings for 15 years straight. I went directly to the master bedroom, stepped into the walk-in closet, and pushed aside a row of winter coats I would never wear again. Behind a false wall panel, something Brent believed existed solely for plumbing access, sat a solid steel safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32. Right to 14. Left to 88. The lock released with a deep, satisfying click. I opened the door, ignoring the velvet box holding diamond earrings Brent had gifted me after his first affair. I passed over the emergency cache. My fingers closed around a thick black accordion folder. I called it the marriage file. I carried it into my home office, a room Brent rarely entered because he found it dull. He assumed I used the space to plan charity events or manage household expenses. That assumption was the most expensive mistake he ever made. You see, the Caldwell family had always viewed me through a narrow, convenient lens. To them, I was Claire the housewife, Claire the supportive spouse, Claire the woman who looked elegant in a cocktail dress and knew when to smile and nod. They believed my economics degree was nothing more than a decorative accomplishment, something to fill time before marriage. What they didn't know was that, for the past 7 years, under my maiden name and through an encrypted remote server, I had been working with Marilyn Advisory. I was a senior risk analyst at a boutique firm, specializing in forensic audits for corporations on the brink of collapse. And I knew exactly where to start. I didn't just understand numbers. I understood how people concealed them. That was my specialty. I spent my days tracking the same kind of corruption Brent tried to mask with expensive cologne and hollow charm. I sat at my desk and powered on my laptop. The blue glow filled the room as I unzipped the black folder in front of me. Inside were no love notes or photographs. It was a burial ground of financial misconduct. I had been wary of Brent for a long time, but not for the reasons he assumed. He believed I was suspicious of his late nights. In reality, I was watching the paperwork he brought home, the documents he casually slid across the kitchen table on random weeknights, asking me to sign as a witness or listed spouse. He'd shrug and say things like, "It's just routine compliance for the merger," or "Legal needs this for an insurance review." I signed them, but I also scanned every single one. I spread the documents across my desk. Tonight wasn't about uncovering anything new. Tonight was about construction. I needed to assemble the weapon before sunrise. I picked up a stack of printed emails. I'd gained access to his private server 3 years earlier, after he neglected to change a password that was still his first dog's name. I began organizing. Pile 1, shell companies. Invoices from a firm called Apex Logistics, registered to a post office box in Delaware. Vanguard Ridge had paid Apex more than $400,000 in the past fiscal year for consulting services. I knew without question that Vanguard never outsourced logistics consulting. Pile 2, kickbacks. Wire transfers, 10,000, 15,000, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic IRS alerts. The recipients were accounts tied to city council affiliates, sent shortly before zoning approvals were granted for Vanguard's new manufacturing sites. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart but had never saved. It was nearly 1 a.m, but I knew he'd be awake. Miles' roar answered on the second ring. His voice was rough, worn down by years of arguing with federal prosecutors. "Did you sign the papers?" he asked. No pleasantries. Miles never wasted words. "I did," I replied, pinning the phone between my shoulder and ear as I highlighted a transaction on a bank statement. "Everything. The settlement, the waiver, the NDA." "Good," Miles said. "Now they think you're neutralized. They'll relax. They'll stop watching their backs because they believe they bought your silence." "He's terrified," I said quietly. "He practically shoved the documents at me. He needed me gone from that company tonight." "Tell me what you found," Miles ordered. I looked at the mess of papers covering my desk. "It's more than embezzlement," I said, my voice dropping as the pattern finally locked into place. "I'm reviewing the vendor list. He's been channeling money into something labeled Project Obsidian. On paper, but based on the procurement records, he's purchasing military-grade components Vanguard isn't licensed to handle." The line went silent. "Claire," Miles said slowly, carefully, "if he's moving restricted technology without authorization, that's not civil exposure. That's federal time. That's bordering on treason." "I know," I said, "but that's not the worst part." I pulled a document from the bottom of the stack, a digital printout I'd recovered from his deleted files just 2 days earlier. It was a compliance certification for a government contract involving guidance chips supplied to a defense contractor. The document required 2 signatures, the chief financial officer and the independent compliance officer. 6 months ago, when this was dated, the compliance officer had been on medical leave. My eyes locked on the signature at the bottom. C. Lopez. My maiden name. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the air conditioning ever could be. "Miles," I said, my voice barely audible, "I'm starring at a federal compliance certificate. It's dated November 12th of last year." There was a brief pause, and Miles prompted. "It has my signature on it," I said. "Did you sign it?" he asked immediately. "No," I replied without hesitation. "On November 12th, I was in Chicago visiting my sister. I wasn't anywhere near the office. I have never seen this document before." I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair shifting as Miles straightened. "He forged your signature?" he asked. "No," I said, leaning closer to the page, studying the curve of the C, the sharp angle of the L. "It isn't a forgery. It's perfect. It matches my handwriting exactly. He must have used a digital stamp, lifted my signature from one of the property deeds or insurance forms I signed years ago. He copied it and pasted it onto a federal document to bypass the audit." The realization struck me like a blow to the chest. "He didn't just want a divorce," I said quietly. "Miles, he needed the divorce to bury this. If this project collapses, if the federal government audits that contract, he isn't the one who certified its legality." "I am." "You're the fall guy," Miles said grimly. "He made you the compliance officer of record without ever putting you on payroll. If the Department of Defense comes looking, they'll be coming for Claire Lopez." I stared at the page, the lie printed in black ink beside my name. Years of being dismissed. Years of being told I didn't understand business. Years of being treated like background furniture. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had monetized me. He had turned my identity into armor to shield himself from his own crimes. A surge of anger rose inside me, clean, sharp, and clarifying. "He thinks I'm his shield," I said. I ended the call and stared at the document again. The file metadata showed it had been modified 3 hours before the dinner tonight. He had been scrubbing the server, consolidating records, making sure that if anyone investigated, every trail pointed directly to his soon-to-be ex-wife. That's when it clicked. The NDA wasn't meant to silence me about his money. It was meant to silence me about my innocence. I reached for the external hard drive I'd prepared, the one holding every file from the Marilyn servers that tied Brent's personal accounts to the fraudulent contracts. "I'm not the shield," I whispered into the empty room. "I'm the sword." Then I noticed something else. In the bottom corner of the certificate, in microscopic print, was a reference code. It linked to a secondary server, one I hadn't been able to access before. But as I studied the pattern, recognition hit me. It was his birthday reversed, combined with our wedding date. Even in his crimes, he was sentimental about his sense of ownership over me. I entered the code into the terminal. The screen flickered, then a new folder opened. My breath caught. This wasn't just a contract. It was a ledger of bribes. And right at the top, authorized by a signature that looked horrifyingly like mine, was a transfer of $2 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I had him, completely. But I also knew if I acted too soon, he'd claim I was a bitter ex-wife fabricating evidence. I had to wait. I needed him to trigger the final stage of his plan. I closed the laptop. Darkness flooded the room again. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I knew exactly what lived there. I sat back in the leather chair of my home office, the silence of the empty house pressing in. The adrenaline from the hotel and from uncovering the stolen signature settled into a cold, heavy weight in my stomach. My eyes drifted to the wedding photograph on the corner of the desk. 18 years old, we looked impossibly young. Brent looked anxious. I looked devoted. If you studied the picture closely, you could already see the pattern that would define the next 2 decades of my life. I was leaning toward him, holding him steady. And he was staring at the camera, waiting for applause. I met Brent when Vanguard Ridge wasn't a dominant player, but a struggling startup bleeding money in a rented warehouse on the outskirts of Austin. He was charismatic, ambitious, and completely chaotic. He had big ideas about component manufacturing, but no clue how to manage cash flow or navigate regulatory requirements. I was 20, a junior analyst whose mind ran on spreadsheets and probability models. I fell for his potential, and that is the most dangerous mistake a woman like me can make. I fell in love with the project that was him. For the first 5 years, I wasn't just his wife. I was his invisible chief financial officer. I worked a full day at my own job, then came home and labored until 2 in the morning fixing his accounts. I constructed the financial framework that kept the company afloat. I developed the cost-cutting strategies that made the first quarter profitable. I built the forecasting models that helped him secure his first $1 million loan. I remembered the night he won Entrepreneur of the Year. I had written his acceptance speech. I had coached him on timing, on pauses, on how to appear modest yet commanding. He stood on the stage, the spotlight catching his perfect teeth, thanking his parents, his mentors, even his golf buddies. But he didn't thank me. Later in the car, I asked about it. He laughed. "Babe, it's about the brand. Investors need to see me as the sole visionary. It confuses the market if they think I'm leaning on my wife. You understand, don't you?" I understood, always did. I told myself it was a partnership. Even if my name wasn't on the door, I was the foundation. Foundations are meant to be invisible. But the foundation had been cracking long before tonight. The Caldwell family never let me forget that I was an acquisition, not a partner. To Marilyn, I was useful. I remembered birthdays, organized the galas, smoothed the social tensions Brent created with his arrogance. But I was never one of them. I was the help who slept in the master bedroom. I remember a dinner 3 years ago. Marilyn was complaining about a tax audit on her estate. She turned to me and said, "Claire, handle this for me, will you? You're so good with the tedious little details." Tedious little details. That's what they called my life's work. That's what they called the intellect that kept them out of bankruptcy court. In the last 2 years, the dynamic had shifted from dismissal to outright exclusion. Brent started locking his phone, taking calls on the terrace. He stopped asking my opinion on the numbers. When I inquired about the company's expansion into foreign markets, he would wave a hand. "You wouldn't understand the complexities, Claire. It's high-level stuff." He was telling the woman who built his entire operational model that she couldn't comprehend how it worked. That's when I noticed the shadows. Her name was Tessa Rowe, 26, the new head of internal public relations. I had met her at the company Christmas party. She was bright, bubbly, and looked at Brent with the kind of admiration I had abandoned years ago. She was everything I was. She was the yes woman. She was the audience he craved. She didn't ask about debt-to-equity ratios. She asked how it felt to be a genius. And I saw the way he looked at her. It wasn't just desire, it was relief. She offered him a reflection where he was flawless, where he didn't need to pretend to be smarter than he was. Because to her, he actually was the smartest man in the room. That was when I understood the truth. I was a mirror reflecting his inadequacy. Every time Brent looked at me, he saw the woman who knew too much. The woman who knew that the legendary Brent Caldwell still needed someone else to tie his financial laces. The spectacle that night, the so-called divorce celebration, was never impulsive. Sitting alone in the darkness, connecting the threads, the cruelty of it became painfully precise. He chose the night of his CEO announcement deliberately. He wanted to shed his past. I belonged to the startup era. I was the outdated infrastructure, functional, essential, but incompatible with the upgrade he wanted to roll out. He planned to step into his future with Tessa, the polished new accessory that fit the CEO image, and leave behind the inconvenient wife who understood too much. It wasn't a breakup. It was an execution. They had rehearsed every part of it. Marilyn's laughter, the pre-printed paperwork, the carefully selected audience of powerful witnesses. It was all engineered to humiliate me into silence. They wanted me so thoroughly broken that I would disappear, never daring to say the words Vanguard Ridge again. They didn't just want a divorce. They wanted an eraser. They wanted to rewrite history, to craft a myth where Brent Caldwell built his empire alone. A self-made titan who rose from nothing. I didn't fit that narrative. But arrogance has a way of blinding people. I looked again at the documents spread across my desk. My fingers brushed the page bearing my forged name. In their rush to remove me, in their desperation to clean up their story, they made a catastrophic mistake. They believed they were discarding me. Instead, by stamping my name onto their illegal shortcuts, by using my identity as cover for fraud, they bound themselves to me more tightly than any marriage certificate ever could. Brent wanted to erase me from existence. He wanted to claim total credit for everything he built. But the paperwork told a different story. The paperwork said Claire Lopez was everywhere. I picked up a red pen and circled the date on the falsified compliance certificate. Then I marked the date on the suspicious bank transfer I had uncovered earlier. They tried to delete me. But the irony was brutal. They left fingerprints all over my life. And unlike them, I knew how to read the system. I was no longer just a discarded wife. I was the archivist of their collapse. And I was only beginning. The morning after the party, the world outside was bright and unaware. Inside my home office, the blinds remained closed. The air vibrated with the steady hum of cooling fans from my external drives. I hadn't slept. I was fueled by espresso and a cold, disciplined anger, one that sharpened my focus better than any stimulant. Miles' roar moved fast. By 8 a.m., he had established a secure, encrypted connection between my laptop and the servers of Stonebridge Forensics. Stonebridge wasn't the kind of firm you found through a simple search. They were former IRS auditors and cybercrime investigators who specialized in uncovering what powerful people worked desperately to hide. I wore a headset, watching a shared screen as their lead forensic accountant, Sarah, walked me through the first findings from the Maryline data dump I had provided. "Claire, are you looking at line item 42? Sarah asked. Her voice was calm, precise, and completely free of sympathy. That's how I knew she was exceptional. I'm looking at it, I replied, zooming in. It's a vendor payment to a company called North Star Logistics. We ran a background check, Sarah said. North Star doesn't exist. The listed address is a vacant lot in Nevada. The tax ID belongs to a man in Florida who's been dead for years. Yet over the last 18 months, Vanguard Ridge issued 3 separate payments totaling $1,200,000. My chest tightened. 3 payments. $1.2 million. Where did the money go? I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to be ugly. It bounced, Sarah explained, tracing the money trail on the screen in red. The funds moved from Vanguard to North Star, sat there for 24 hours, then transferred to a consulting firm in Panama. From there, the amounts were split, $9,000 here, $8,000 there, and redirected into executive incentive bonus accounts. I stared at the display. It was a textbook round-tripping operation. Brent was siphoning company funds, laundering them through a phantom vendor, and cycling the money back to line his own pockets and those of his inner circle. It was outright theft. No gray area, no justification. Then Sarah opened another file. This is where it becomes dangerous for you, she said. Claire, look at the authorization on the North Star contract. I leaned forward. It was a vendor approval form, and at the bottom, under the reviewing officer's line, was a signature. C. Lopez. My stomach sank. He used your name to approve the theft, Sarah continued, and it gets worse. She opened another directory, labeled Regulatory Compliance, buried deep within the server's structure. Inside were dozens of PDFs. Safety certifications. Environmental impact reports. Labor compliance audits. Every single one carried my signature, or my digital stamp. I leaned back in my chair as the blood drained from my face. These weren't internal documents. These were federally mandated filings. If a factory was illegally dumping waste, or if faulty equipment injured a worker, investigators wouldn't look at Brent first. They would go straight to the individual who certified the safety reviews. That person was me. I began typing rapidly, digging through the email archives I had already downloaded. I needed intent. I needed proof this wasn't carelessness or convenience. I found an email thread from 6 months earlier. It was between Brent and his chief operations officer, Gary, a man I had hosted at my dinner table more times than I could count. The subject line read, Audit Concerns North Star. Gary had written, Brent, auditors are questioning why we're using an unverified logistics vendor. We need risk management sign-off or this will get flagged. My breath caught as I scrolled. Brent's reply, Don't worry about it. I'll take care of the approval. I have Claire's stamp. Put it on the paperwork. No one questions the wife's signature. She's basically a rubber stamp anyway. If anything comes up later, we'll say she reviewed it at home. It gives us a firewall. I read the word again. Firewall. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even a participant. I was a human shield. He had constructed a firewall out of my name, my credibility, my reputation, using it to absorb the impact of his crimes. The realization struck like a physical blow. This had always been his exit plan. He knew the company was decaying from the inside because of his embezzlement. He knew regulators would eventually investigate. And when they did, he intended to stand there, the devastated, betrayed CEO, and say, I had no idea. My wife handled compliance. I trusted her, and she betrayed the company. He would walk away wealthy. And I would go to prison for fraud and embezzlement. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to Miles. He's framing me. This isn't just about the house. He's positioning me to take the fall for federal crimes. Miles responded immediately. Keep digging. We need a timeline. We need proof of premeditation. And I knew exactly where to look next. I turned back to my monitors and opened a blank workspace. I began constructing a timeline, laying out every forged signature, every wire transfer, and every major personal milestone along a single horizontal line. January 15. Brent transfers $300,000 to the Panama account. January 16. A Foreign Corrupt Practices Act compliance form signed by C. Lopez. March 3. Brent buys Tessa a diamond bracelet worth $40,000. March 4. Another falsified signature on a vendor authorization form. I kept adding entries. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every time he siphoned money, my name appeared on paperwork within 48 hours to seal the paper trail. Then I focused on the most recent activity. 2 weeks ago, Vanguard Ridge announces a board vote for the acquisition of a competing tech firm valued at $400 million. 1 week ago, Brent creates a file titled Full Liability Release, C. Lopez. Last night, divorce papers served, including the NDA and a waiver of all claims. The realization, locked into place like the tumblers of a vault. The acquisition. If Vanguard purchased the rival firm, the due diligence process would be exhaustive. Auditors would comb through every financial record. They would uncover the North Star transactions. They would uncover the fabricated safety certifications. Brent needed me divorced and silenced before that deal closed. He needed the liability release signed so that when auditors found the fraud, he could present it and say, "We uncovered my ex-wife's misconduct. She's been removed, and she accepted responsibility." The divorce wasn't the end of the relationship. It was the final stage of the setup. I opened the shared corporate calendar. Next Friday, 10:00 a.m. Special board meeting. Vote on acquisition of Cyberdyne Systems. That was the deadline. Once that vote passed, the acquisition would proceed. External auditors would step in. They would find everything. And by then, Brent would be holding my signed divorce documents in one hand and forged compliance approvals in the other. He would seal my fate and walk away clean. I stared at the date. 7 days. 7 days to dismantle a lie he had spent 18 years building. My phone vibrated. A message from the Stonebridge team. "Claire," Sarah typed in the secure chat, "you need to see this. We just located the board meeting agenda. Look at item 4. I opened the file. Item 4. Ratification of all prior compliance certifications and risk assessments conducted by the external advisor, C. Lopez. They were planning to vote to fast-track approval of every document I had supposedly signed. Once ratified, those records would become official corporate doctrine. Permanent. My skin went cold. He wasn't just preparing for me to take the fall if things unraveled. He was engineering a vote that would make it legally impossible for me to deny those signatures. I grabbed my phone and called Miles. "Miles," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "They're voting next Friday. They're going to ratify the forgeries." "Then we stop the meeting," Miles replied immediately. "No," I said, eyes fixed on the screen as a new idea took shape. "If we stop it, he'll destroy the evidence. He'll claim clerical error. He'll bury everything." I looked back at the timeline. At the email where he called me a rubber stamp. "We let the meeting happen," I said. A pause. "Claire, that's suicide," Miles warned. "No," I replied calmly. "It's a trap." "But this time," I added, "I'm not the one stepping into it." I ended the call and stared at the calendar again. 7 days. Brent believed he was the only one who knew how to play the long game. He was wrong. He believed he was the only one who understood leverage, but he had forgotten the fundamental principle of risk analysis. The most dangerous variable is the one you think is already controlled. I was that variable, and I was about to become highly, dangerously uncontrollable. 2 days after the party, the quiet of the house was shattered by my phone ringing. The screen lit up with Brent's name. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. In the old days, a call at this hour usually meant he had misplaced his golf clubs or needed a reminder about a donor's details. Today, it felt like a probe sent into deep water, testing for explosives. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to sound lethargic, beaten down. I cleared my throat and said, "Hello," keeping my tone soft and slightly uneven. "Claire." His voice was warm, dripping with that manufactured concern he reserved for shareholders after a poor earnings report. "I just wanted to check on you. I know the other night was intense. I wanted to make sure you're holding up." He wasn't checking on me. He was checking on his firewall. "I'm fine, Brent," I said, leaning back in my office chair. My eyes locked on the high-definition timeline glowing on the Stonebridge forensics display. "I'm just trying to process everything. It's a lot to unpack, 18 years in a single weekend." "I understand," he said, relief faint in his voice. He thought I was drowning in despair. "Listen, I noticed some activity on the shared cloud server, just some old files being accessed. I assumed it was you grabbing personal photos." There it was, the real question. "Oh, that," I said, making my tone casual, dismissive. "Yes, I was looking for tax returns from 3 years ago. My accountant said, I need them to accurately calculate the capital gains on the house you gave me since it's so leveraged. I need to make sure I don't get hit with a bill I can't pay." A pause. I could hear him calculating. Tax returns were safe. Tax returns were boring. They weren't secret compliance certificates. Right. "Well," he said, "make sure you only take what belongs to you, Claire. We don't want to breach the NDA by having proprietary company data in your possession." "I wouldn't dream of it," I lied. "I just want this to be over, Brent. I just want to move on." "Good," he said. "That's sensible." He hung up. He believed he had reassured himself. He believed the mouse was cornered and trembling. He had no idea the mouse was currently constructing a guillotine. An hour later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was long, insistent, demanding immediate attention. I checked the security camera. Marilyn. I opened the door. My mother-in-law stood there in a cream-colored Chanel suit worth more than the average American earns in 3 months. She didn't wait for an invitation. She strode past me into the foyer, her eyes sweeping the house as though appraising a property she intended to foreclose upon. "I see you're still here," she said, peeling off her leather gloves. "I assumed you might have had the decency to leave by now." "Hello, Marilyn," I said, closing the door behind her. "What do I owe this visit to?" I asked. "I came to make sure you understand the reality of where you stand," she replied, turning fully toward me. "Brent is weak. He feels remorse. I don't." She stepped into the living room and dragged a finger slowly across the mantel. "You are a grasping woman, Claire," she snapped. "You signed the agreement, but I know you're kind. You'll try to come back for more. You'll attempt to bleed him through alimony or invent some hidden claim." I stayed in the doorway, my hands folded calmly in front of me. With a subtle tap of my right index finger against the glass of my smartwatch, I activated the voice recorder. "Marilyn," I said evenly, "I signed everything. I accepted the house with the debt. I accepted the $50,000. What exactly do you think I could still take?" She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You think 50,000 is money? That's pocket change. You have no idea what Brent is worth now, and you never will. That's intentional." I moved to the side table and poured a glass of water from the carafe. I needed her talking. I needed details. "I know the company is thriving," I said, handing her the glass. "But Brent said most of his wealth is tied up in stock. He said liquidity is limited." She looked at me with pure contempt and swallowed the bait hole. "He tells you that because you're naive," she sneered. "Stocks are for appearances. Do you really believe my son would trust his future to the market? Please, he has assets you couldn't even pronounce." She took a sip of water, then leaned closer, lowering her voice as if savoring the cruelty. "That Cayman account alone could buy this entire neighborhood twice," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "And the beauty of it, it's completely invisible under tax law. He was smart enough to move it before the divorce filing. So dig all you want, you little parasite. You'll never catch its scent." My pulse surged. She had just confirmed the offshore account and the timing of the transfer. Concealment of assets during divorce proceedings. a felony. "Thank you for telling me that, Marilyn," I said calmly. "It explains why he was so generous with the house." "I'm not telling you for clarity," she snapped, slamming the glass onto the table hard enough to nearly crack the coaster. "I'm telling you so you understand you're finished. Don't challenge the NDA. Don't file a lawsuit. If you do, we'll destroy you. We own judges. We employ lawyers who devour people like you." She straightened her jacket and marched toward the door. "Know your place, Claire. You were a visitor in our world. Your stay has ended." She slammed the door behind her. I counted to 5. Then I tapped my watch again and saved the recording. I titled the file, Maryland Asset Concealment Admission. I sent it to Miles immediately. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. A message from Brent. The tone was entirely different. He must have spoken to Marilyn. He must have realized her victory lap had cracked his armor, or the looming board meeting was tightening the noose. The text read, "I hope you're not letting my mother fill your head with ideas. She talks too much, but listen carefully. If you try to reopen the settlement, I will sue you for breach of contract. I will sue you for defamation. I will make sure you never work in finance again. I have people who deal with problems like you. Don't test me." He was unraveling, threatening reputational destruction and unnamed enforcers because he was afraid. A man confident in his win doesn't send threats by text on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't respond. I forwarded the screenshot to Miles with a single line. "They're getting scared." Then I returned to my office. It was time for the final move of the day. I had the proof. I had the timeline. I had the recording. But keeping it all on my laptop was no longer safe. If Brent truly decided to send the people he'd hinted at, men meant to break into my home and take my computer, I would lose everything in an instant. I logged into the Marilyn Advisory interface. This wasn't a consumer cloud service. It was a private server facility buried deep underground in Switzerland, secured by 3 separate layers of biometric authentication. It was the digital equivalent of a fortified vault. I opened the folder labeled Project Caldwell. Inside were the forged signatures, the North Star invoices, the embezzlement timeline, Marilyn's recorded confession, screenshots of Brent's threats. I initiated the transfer. The progress bar crept forward, 10%, 40%, 80%. I watched the green line advance, pixel by pixel, and felt the pressure on my chest begin to ease. Once this data lived on Marilyn's servers, it was beyond reach. They could smash my laptop, ransack my home, even burn the place down. The truth would still exist. Upload complete. I shut the laptop and sat quietly in the low light, listening as the hard drive wound down. They believed they were dealing with an emotionally unstable ex-wife. They had no idea they were facing a trained risk analyst who had just secured her entire case off-site. I stood, stretching, noticing hunger for the first time in 2 days. I headed toward the kitchen. My phone vibrated. I stopped, assuming it was Brent again, returning with another threat. Or Marilyn, realizing she'd said too much. I picked it up. A text message from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk. I have the files he told me to delete." I stared at the screen. The files he told me to delete. There was only one person close enough to receive orders like that. One person trusted enough to be told what needed to disappear, and frightened enough not to comply. Not an ally. An adversary. But in wars like this, sometimes the enemy of your enemy becomes your sharpest weapon. I looked at the message for a long time. The name Tessa Rowe tasted like broken glass in my mouth. My first instinct was to block the number, to hurl the phone across the room, to refuse contact with the woman who had helped dismantle my marriage. But instinct wasn't driving me anymore. Information was. And intelligence demanded data, from every possible source, even if that source was the woman sleeping with my husband. I agreed to meet her. Not at my house. Not at Vanguard. I chose a small 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial zone, a place where truck drivers and night shift workers ate pie at 3 in the morning. Neutral territory. Unremarkable. Far from the social circles where Marilyn might have eyes. I arrived 15 minutes early. I took a booth facing the entrance, my back against the wall, ordered black coffee, waited. When Tessa walked in, she didn't resemble the polished, victorious figure from the society pages. She wore a trench coat cinched tight at the waist. Her hair, usually flawless, was pulled into a loose, messy knot. Dark sunglasses covered her eyes despite the gray, rainy afternoon. She glanced over her shoulder twice before spotting me. She slid into the booth across from me, removed her sunglasses, and revealed deep shadows beneath her eyes. She looked frightened. I didn't greet her, I simply watched. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly, her voice unsteady. She motioned for water, her hands shaking as she flattened the napkin on the table. "I'm curious, Tessa," I said calmly. "Most mistresses wait until the divorce ink dries before taking a victory lap. Or did you come to ask how to remove red wine stains from the carpet?" She flinched, small but noticeable, then composed herself. "I'm not here to fight you, Claire," she said, leaning forward. "And I'm not here to boast. I'm here because I think I'm in danger." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You're involved with a married man who's currently under internal investigation for embezzlement," I replied evenly. "Yes, that qualifies as trouble, but it sounds like a personal issue." "It's not just that," she hissed, lowering her voice to a whisper. She glanced around the diner nervously, paranoid. "He's making me do things." "Do things?" I asked. "He made me stay late 3 nights in a row," she said. "He gave me his administrative login. He told me to scrub the email archives. He told me to delete certain threads from the server before the acquisition audit starts next week." I set my coffee cup down. The ceramic clicked against the saucer. "He asked you to destroy evidence?" I asked. "He said it was just cleaning up old clutter," she replied, eyes wide and glistening. "He said it was standard procedure to delete duplicate files. But Claire, I read them. I read the emails before deleting them. They weren't duplicates. They were conversations with vendors that don't exist. Drafts of the compliance forms with your name on them." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She placed it on the table between us. It looked innocuous, like something for vacation photos. "I didn't delete them," she whispered. "I copied them." I stared at the drive, then I looked at her. "Why?" I asked. "Why bring this to me?" "You're his future. You're the new Mrs. Caldwell." She let out a bitter, dry laugh. "There is no future. Claire, do you think I'm stupid? I work in PR. I know how to spin stories, but I also know when a story is about to collapse." She pointed a manicured finger at the drive. "Yesterday, he told me to sign an affidavit saying I witnessed you accessing the secure server from home. He wanted me to lie, to claim I saw you tampering with files." She inhaled sharply. "If I sign that and the feds investigate, I'm not just a witness. I'm a conspirator. Obstruction of justice. I'm 26 years old, Claire. I'm not going to federal prison for a man who won't even introduce me to his mother because he thinks it's too soon." I realized then that I had misjudged her. I had assumed she was a villain. She was. She was a survivor, selfish, opportunistic, morally flexible, but not suicidal. She had understood that Brent was not a golden ticket. He was a weight, and he was dragging her down. I picked up the USB drive. It felt cool in my hand. "What do you want?" I asked. "Immunity," she said immediately. "Or the closest thing to it. I want out. I want to leave Vanguard Ridge and Brent Caldwell without a criminal record. If I give you this, if I testify he ordered me to destroy evidence, can you keep me from being implicated?" "I'm not a prosecutor. Tessa, I can't promise immunity," I said. "But you have a lawyer," she said. "A good one." I had looked him up. Miles Rohr. He negotiates deals. "Tell him I'll cooperate. Just don't let me go down with him," she said. I studied her, really looked at her. I saw the fear Brent had instilled. He used people, my intellect, her devotion, and when we became inconvenient, he tried to discard us. I pocketed the drive. I'll speak to Miles, I said. If this drive contains what you claim, we can position you as a whistleblower rather than a co-conspirator, but you must follow my instructions exactly. I will, she said, relief flooding her features. Go back to work, I directed. Act normal. Pretend you deleted the files. Let him think he's safe. If he asks you to sign anything else, stall him, say you need to review the wording. Do not sign. I rose. I didn't thank her. She wasn't doing this for me. She was protecting herself. But in a war, you don't inspect the ammunition. You just load the weapon. I left the diner and got into my car. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and connected to the secure hotspot. I initiated a remote session with Stonebridge Forensics. Sarah, I said into my headset, I'm uploading a new batch of files. Source is internal. Verify authenticity immediately. I waited in the car, listening to the rain hammering the roof. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then Sarah's voice cut through, crisp and unmistakably energized. Claire, this is gold. Tell me, I said. We have metadata, Sarah replied. We have the original creation timestamps of the forged documents, but more importantly, we recovered a deleted email from Brent to his personal attorney. You need to hear this. I straightened. When was it sent? 3 days ago, Sarah said. It reads, the wife is contained. She signed the NDA. Once Tessa clears the server logs, there will be no trace connecting me to the North Star accounts. If anything emerges, we stick to the narrative that Claire was running a covert operation. She has the financial expertise. It's believable she siphoned funds without my knowledge. A cold smile touched my lips. There it was, intent, malice, premeditation. He wasn't merely shifting blame. He was constructing a storyline where my competence became evidence of guilt. He was weaponizing my resume. And Tessa, I asked. The drive contains a chat log, Sarah continued. Internal messaging app, Brent to Tessa, quote, don't ask questions, just wipe the drive. If you want to be my wife, you need to learn how to protect the family. Do this and we're free. End quote. He had tied a promise of marriage to the commission of a felony. He's a monster, I murmured. He's careless, Sarah corrected, and now he's exposed. I disconnected and called Miles. We have it, I said. The smoking gun, Tessa flipped. I heard Miles exhale slowly. That changes everything, he said. We're no longer shielding you from a hostile divorce. We're assembling a case for criminal conspiracy and fraud. I want this stopped before the board meeting next Friday, I said. We have enough to go to the authorities. We do, Miles agreed. But listen carefully. If we move now, he could catch wind of it. He has influence. He could destroy remaining backups or disappear to that Cayman account his mother bragged about. So what's the move? I asked. We need a kill shot, Miles said. Fast, public, irreversible, something that catches him finalizing the fraud. The board meeting, I said, understanding immediately. Exactly, Miles replied. He thinks he's walking in to be crowned. We make sure he walks out in handcuffs, but we'll need federal involvement. Local law enforcement will be too slow and too vulnerable to pressure. We need people who don't care about his name. I went quiet. I knew exactly who commanded that kind of force. For 18 years, I had been determined to prove I didn't need my father's help. I married a man who was the opposite of my rigid military father because I wanted independence. I wanted to build something myself. Instead, I built a cage. And to break out of it, I needed the one person I'd spent years avoiding. Miles, I said softly, I know who to call. Are you sure? He asked. Once you make that call, there's no pulling it back. It leaves our control. I watched rain streak down the windshield. I pictured Brent's smug smile at the party, Marilyn's laughter. 18 years spent building a ladder for a man who kicked it away once he reached the top. I'm sure, I said. I ended the call. I sat still, gathering myself. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't dialed in 4 years. It was labeled simply, General. I pressed call. I sat in my car, as the rain continued pounding the roof, staring at the name glowing on my screen. General wasn't a nickname. It was what the world called him, and in many ways it was who he remained, even at home. Thomas Lopez, retired 3-star general, current senior strategic advisor for the Federal Contract Integrity Bureau. I had not spoken to him in 4 years, not since the Christmas dinner where he told me Brent was a glittering distraction with no real framework, and I told him I was exhausted from being treated like a recruit in his unit instead of his daughter. I had walked out that night. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself to proving him wrong. I built a life without his reach, without his network, without the intimidating shadow of his authority hovering over every decision I made. But now, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal, the truth settled in with brutal clarity. I hadn't proven him wrong. I had proven him right. Brent had no structural strength, and now the entire structure was collapsing onto me. I didn't need comfort. I didn't need money. I needed the one thing my father had in limitless supply, the power to halt a runaway train. I pressed call. The phone rang once, then twice. "Lopez," a voice answered. It wasn't a question, it was an assertion of presence. His voice was exactly as I remembered, gravel layered over steel, stripped of unnecessary warmth, yet razor alert. "Dad," I said evenly. He had taught me that panic was a luxury survival could not afford. "It's Claire." Silence followed, dense and deliberate. I could hear the faint scratch of a pen against paper. Then it stopped. "Claire," he said, his tone didn't soften. "Are you safe?" "Physically, yes," I replied. "Legally, I'm in the kill zone." I skipped apologies and small talk. I knew how his mind worked. He wanted the headline, the intelligence, then the request. "Brent is running a fraud operation through Vanguard Ridge involving federal defense contracts," I said, precise and fast. "He's been siphoning funds through shell vendors. He forged my signature on compliance certifications to evade audits. He's preparing to finalize a merger next Friday that would ratify those forgeries. He's positioning me to take responsibility for 18 months of systematic theft." The silence returned. 10 seconds, then 20. I didn't interrupt it. "Scale?" he asked. 1.2 million confirmed, I answered. "Potential exposure on the acquisition is 400 million. And the signature?" "It's a digital stamp," I said. "But there's an email trail instructing staff to use it without my consent. He calls it a firewall." I heard a sharp breath, his only allowance for anger. "You're the firewall," he said flatly. "Yes." "Do you have proof?" he asked. "Not theory, not rumor, evidence that survives federal court." "I have Marilyn server logs," I said. "Bank transfers, a recording of his mother admitting asset concealment. And 30 minutes ago, I received a USB drive from his mistress containing direct instructions to destroy evidence of federal noncompliance." "Send it," he ordered. "Secure channel. Do you still remember the encryption key?" "I never forgot it," I replied. "Send a summary. I'm at the bureau. I'll review it now." He didn't hang up. He set the phone down. I could hear keyboard strokes. I opened my laptop, tethered it to my phone, and initiated the transfer to his private encrypted Dropbox. "Sent," I said. For 5 minutes, the only sound was the low hum of office air conditioning and the occasional mouse click. I sat in my darkened car, my heartbeat slow and heavy. This was the point of no return. Once Thomas Lopez saw this, it stopped being a family matter. It became a federal operation. Finally, his voice returned, colder now, precise, lethal. "The girl," he said. "Ro, she's the witness. She's frightened." "She wants a deal," I replied. "If the drive is legitimate," he continued, "she's just handed us intent. Without it, this is a volatile divorce with financial misconduct. With it, this is conspiracy to defraud the United States government. That triggers FCIB authority. We have jurisdiction." I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Jurisdiction. That single word removed local law enforcement. The ones who played golf with Brent from the equation. It bypassed state courts entirely. "What do I do?" I asked. "Nothing," he said sharply. "Dad, the board meeting is in 7 days. They're going to vote." "Let them," he replied. "If you move now, he wipes the backups. He claims the USB was stolen or planted. He hires lawyers and drags this out for 5 years while your name decays. You need him calm. You need him walking into that room convinced he's already won." "He's threatening me," I said. "He's trying to frighten me into silence." "Good," my father answered. "Fear makes men careless. Arrogance makes them blind. Let him be arrogant, do not react, do not push back, let him believe you're finished." "He thinks I'm weak," I said, bitterness tightening my throat. "You're a Lopez," he said. "Use the camouflage." He paused. For a brief second, the general stepped back and the father surfaced, just barely. "I read the file," he said. "Claire, you built that company's entire financial framework." "Yes." "And he believes he can rip it apart and bury you beneath it without you noticing." "Yes." "Then he's a fool," he said, "and we're about to give him a lesson in structural collapse." "The meeting is at headquarters," I said. "Friday, 10. He's planning a celebration toast right after the vote." "I know the procedure," he said. "I'll handle the logistics. You just make sure you're in that room." "He may try to keep me out," I said. "He wants me gone." "He'll let you in," my father said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. "Because he wants to gloat. He wants to see you beaten. Give him that. Walk in with your head lowered. Sign whatever he puts in front of you if you must. Let him believe the trap has closed. And then, he said, you wait for the door to open." "Who's coming?" I asked, though I already knew. "I am," he said, "and I'm bringing the cleaners." He meant the tactical teams, the agents who secured scenes and executed federal warrants. "Dad," I said, emotion surging unexpectedly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he cut in. "We move Friday. Until then, you're invisible. You don't discuss raid details with your lawyer. You don't speak to the girl. You stay in that house and let him dig his grave deeper." "Understood," I said. The old reflex returned, the soldier answering the command. "Claire," he said just before disconnecting. "Yes." "When that door opens on Friday," he said, his voice hard as flint, "don't look at the floor, don't look at your husband. Look straight ahead, look at me, and don't blink." "I won't," I said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My hand was steady now. The fear that had been chewing at my insides for 3 days had vanished, replaced by a cold, settled certainty. Brent had his board members. He had his mother. He had his millions tucked away offshore. But I had the United States government. And more importantly, I had a father who had waited 4 years for a reason to remind the world that no one touches his blood. I started the car. The engine came alive with a low roar. I drove home, not as a victim returning to the scene, but as a forward observer marking coordinates for an airstrike. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of Vanguard Ridge headquarters felt less like an ascent and more like being chambered into a sleek, glass-walled revolver. Friday morning, 10 o'clock exactly. San Antonio stretched below in gray and green blocks beneath the relentless Texas sun. Inside the building, the air was cooled to a crisp, sterile 68 degrees. I adjusted the cuff of my blazer. I'd chosen a soft dove gray suit, not a power suit. The color of someone fading into the background, exactly what Brent wanted to see. When the elevator doors slid open, the reception area hummed with sharp, frantic energy. The acquisition vote was set for noon, followed by a press briefing. Staff moved quickly through the corridors wearing headsets, balancing catering trays and bundles of media packets. Despite the chaos, I wasn't escorted to the main boardroom. Instead, Brent's executive assistant, a young woman who looked at me with a blend of sympathy and curiosity, led me down a quieter hall. "Mr. Caldwell is expecting you in the private lounge," she said gently. I stepped inside. The room was vast, anchored by a long table crafted from imported teak and a floor-to-ceiling view worth more than my father's retirement. Brent stood near the window, straightening his tie while watching his reflection in the glass. He turned when I entered, offering a smile that stopped short of his eyes. "Claire," he said, opening his arms slightly, as though welcoming an old colleague rather than the wife he was actively setting up. "Thank you for coming. I know this is unconventional, but legal insisted." He wasn't alone. Marilyn sat in a leather armchair near the corner, poised like a monarch overseeing a sentence. She wore a deep crimson dress that clashed sharply with the room's muted palette. "Let's not pretend this is a friendly visit," she said coolly. "Brent," Marilyn added, slicing through his performance. She rose and crossed toward the table, her heels sinking into the thick carpet. "Get her signature so she can go. The board arrives in 20 minutes. We don't need remnants of your past cluttering the room." Brent exhaled, giving me a rehearsed look of regret. "You know how my mother is," he said smoothly. "But she's right about timing. We need everything settled before the vote." He motioned for me to sit. I took the chair opposite him, keeping my hands folded in my lap, not from fear, but to contain the fury surging through me. "What is this?" I asked quietly. "I thought I signed everything at the party." "Just a technicality," Brent said, sliding a single document across the gleaming surface. "An addendum, a confirmation of the waiver." I scanned the title. "Affidavit of Voluntary Relinquishment and Ratification of Prior Actions." I read the opening paragraph. It wasn't a waiver, it was a full confession. By signing, I would be declaring that I had sole knowledge and authority over all compliance matters for the past 5 years, and that I had willingly handed control to the current executive team. This was the final strike. Signing meant retroactively claiming responsibility for every forged signature, fabricated inspection, and illegal transfer. It would be a ready-made admission he could hand to federal investigators. "I see," I said evenly. "You want me to certify that I'm abandoning the projects I built." Brent nodded, leaning closer, eyes fixed on mine. His voice softened into the tone he used to close million-dollar deals. "This is for your benefit, Claire. It separates you entirely. If the company expands, if risks are taken, you won't be exposed. I'm protecting you. I want you to start fresh." The lie flowed effortlessly, almost admirably so. Marilyn scoffed from the side. "Protect her? How generous. She should be thankful we're not billing her for the years she spent writing your success." She turned her gaze on me, sharp and dismissive. "Sign it, Claire. Sign it and vanish. Go marry some small-time accountant. Leave the empire to grown-ups." My eyes dropped to the pen Brent had placed beside the paper. A Montblanc, black, solid, expensive. I picked it up. I paused for just a moment. This was the moment. Dad had told me to let him feel secure. He had told me to allow the trap to close. But I was not about to sign my own execution order without leaving myself an escape hatch. I uncapped the pen. "I'll sign," I said quietly. Brent released a breath, his shoulders dropping a couple of inches. "Excellent." I turned the page. I didn't just sign at the end. I placed my initials in the lower right corner of the first page. Then I did the same on the second. To an untrained observer, to Brent and Marilyn, it looked like careful thoroughness. The meticulous, detail-obsessed wife they dismissed. But I wasn't simply initialing. After the date on each page, I added a faint, nearly invisible vertical mark. A notation Miles and I had used for years in internal drafts to flag disputed consent or content under review. It didn't invalidate the document legally, but to a forensic document examiner, it created a pattern. Proof that I had reviewed the pages deliberately and marked them in a way that contradicted the idea of blind, cheerful consent. I reached the final signature line. Brent tracked the pen like a predator. Marilyn tapped her foot, irritated. I signed my name. Claire Lopez Caldwell. I finished with a smooth flourish and snapped the pen shut, the sharp click echoing through the quiet room. I slid the document back across the table. "There," I said, "you're free of me." Brent snatched the papers, scanning my signature to confirm it was clear. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked like a man who had dodged death and hit the jackpot in the same hour. He stood, clutching the document like a trophy. "Thank you, Claire," he said. He moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of scotch, not one for me. He raised his glass toward Marilyn. "To the future." "To the future," she echoed, clinking her glass against his. She turned to me, a cruel smile curling her lips. "Goodbye to the past." Brent looked at me, arrogance gleaming in his eyes. "You know, Claire," he said, his tone thick with condescension, "I really do appreciate this. You were useful in the beginning, a good stepping stone, but some people are meant for the ground floor and some belong in the penthouse." Marilyn laughed, a sharp, grating sound. "Oh, Brent, don't get sentimental," she sneered. "She was just the help, and now we've finally taken out the trash." They stood together, laughing, mother and son, certain they owned everything. Drunk on power. Completely unaware that the paper Brent was holding wasn't protection. It was a tracking signal. I remained seated, silent. I didn't stand. I didn't move. Brent noticed. He lowered his glass, frowning. "You can leave now, Claire," he said, gesturing toward the door. "The show's over." I looked at him. I looked at Marilyn. And for the first time in months, I let a real smile appear. "No, Brent," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the room. "The show is just beginning." He opened his mouth to respond, to demand an explanation. But he never got the chance. Behind me, the heavy double doors didn't simply open. They were slammed wide with explosive force, the handles crashing against the walls like a gunshot. The laughter died instantly. Brent froze, his glass suspended mid-air. Marilyn spun around, her face draining as shock took hold. I did not turn around. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who had entered. My eyes stayed fixed on Brent, watching the color drain from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The expensive cologne and scotch were overpowered by the sharp scent of authority. The silence that followed the slamming doors was absolute. Not the hush of a library, but the vacuum of a room where all air had been expelled in a single instant. My father, Thomas Lopez, stepped across the threshold. He wasn't in uniform, but it didn't matter. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to his broad shoulders with military precision. His tie knotted tightly against a crisp white collar. He ignored me. He ignored the sweeping view of the San Antonio skyline. His eyes, cold and hard as slate, fixed directly on Brent. It was a look I had seen only once before, aimed at a soldier caught asleep on duty. A look of assessment, calculating the most efficient way to neutralize a threat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space, reducing the expensive furnishings and the arrogant occupants to insignificance. Flanking him were 2 men clearly not hotel security or local law enforcement. Their dark blue suits were tailored to conceal, yet the bulge of shoulder holsters was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Small silver lapel pins identified them as Federal Contract Integrity Bureau officers. They didn't brandish weapons, but their hands rested near their waistlines. Their stance was relaxed, but coiled, ready to spring. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that screamed federal training. One agent, a man with a buzz cut and a face chiseled from stone, stepped forward. He flipped open a leather wallet, displaying a gold badge and ID photo. "Federal agents," he announced, his voice flat but carrying to the back of the room without raising it. "We are executing a federal warrant for the preservation of evidence and the detention of key witnesses in an ongoing investigation into procurement fraud and conspiracy against the Department of Defense." Brent froze, his hand still clutching the glass of scotch. The liquid rippled from his trembling. His face went from victorious flush to ghostly pale. For a moment, his mind failed to process the new reality. He flicked his gaze between the agents, me, and my father, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This is a mistake," Brent stammered, his voice cracking on the last word. "This is a private meeting. You have no jurisdiction here. This is corporate headquarters." The agent ignored him, turning slightly toward his partner. Secure the exits. No one leaves. Do not touch any digital devices. Marilyn, who had been sitting like a queen on a throne, suddenly scrambled upright. Her face twisted in indignation, her eyes darting with the panic of a cornered animal. "Do you know who we are?" she shrieked, voice sharp and breaking. "You cannot just storm in here with weapons. We are the Caldwells. I'll have your badges for this. I'll call the mayor." She reached into her purse, presumably for her phone. The second agent moved with 2 long strides, positioning himself directly in her path, looming over her. "Ma'am, put your hands where I can see them," he commanded. His tone was not a request. Attempting to access a communication device during the execution of a federal warrant will be considered obstruction of justice. Do not make me handcuff you. Marilyn froze, her gaze locked on the agent. Then her gaze locked onto me. The fury on her face collapsed into something far worse, recognition. Horror bloomed slowly, like dawn breaking over a nightmare. She stared at me as if I were a creature she had summoned without understanding the cost. "You," she whispered, her finger trembling as it pointed in my direction. "You did this, you ungrateful little witch." My father finally moved. He stepped past the agents, past the table where the freshly signed documents still rested, and stopped 3 feet from Brent. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stood there, solid, immovable, a living verdict. Brent straightened, forcing his spine upright, scrambling for scraps of authority. He set his glass down with a sharp clink. "General Lopez," Brent said, attempting a calm, authoritative tone. "I assume this is some kind of theatrical pressure tactic on behalf of your daughter, but bringing armed men into my office is not a negotiation." My father cut him off. His voice was low, thunderous, the kind you feel vibrate in your ribcage. "These are not my men. They belong to the United States government. And you, Brent, are about to become their problem." "What are you talking about?" Brent snapped, though sweat was already beading across his forehead. "I've done nothing illegal. My company is finalizing a $400 million acquisition." "That acquisition," the lead agent said, stepping forward, "is built on stolen taxpayer funds and a foundation of fraud." He placed a document on the teak table, a search warrant. "We have authorization to access all Vanguard Ridge servers," the agent continued. "We've identified suspicious transfers exceeding $2 million routed to the Cayman Islands, along with extensive falsification of federal compliance documentation." "That's a lie," Brent shouted, his composure finally cracking. He slammed his palm onto the table. "You have no proof. Those documents were signed by the compliance officer. If there's wrongdoing, talk to her." He pointed straight at me. "Talk to my wife. She handled compliance. She signed everything. I ran the company." I watched him do exactly what I knew he would, try to sacrifice me to save himself. My father's eyes narrowed. The air seemed to chill another 10 degrees. "Is that your claim?" he asked quietly. "That she acted alone?" "She signed them," Brent barked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Her name is on the paperwork. She's who you want." The lead agent turned toward the door. "Bring her in," he ordered into his lapel mic. The doors opened again. Brent turned, expecting another agent, or maybe legal counsel. Instead, Tessa Rowe stepped inside. She looked small against the doorway, pale, clutching her purse to her chest like armor. She didn't look at Brent. Her eyes stayed on the floor. "Tessa," Brent breathed, the word escaping like air from a punctured tire. "What are you doing here? Tell them. Tell them Claire accessed the servers." Tessa stopped beside the agents. She inhaled shakily, then lifted her head. Her eyes were red but resolute. "I can't do that, Brent," she said softly. In the silence, her voice landed like a hammer. "What?" he hissed. "I gave them the USB drive," she said, finally meeting his gaze. There was no affection left, only survival. "The one you handed me yesterday. The one with your emails ordering me to erase evidence of forged compliance records. The one where you told me to frame Claire." Brent stared at her. His mouth fell open. The betrayal struck harder than the badges, harder than the warrants. He staggered backward, bracing himself against the glass. "You," he whispered, "you traitor." "I did exactly what you taught me," Tessa replied, her voice shaking. "I protected myself." Silence fell again. The proof was in the room. The witness was standing there. The trap wasn't just closed, it was sealed shut. My father stepped closer, invading Brent's space, forcing him to lift his eyes. He was staring into the gaze of a man who had commanded armies, and who had just decided Brent Caldwell was finished. "You believed she was fragile," my father said, motioning toward me without breaking eye contact with Brent. "You assumed that because she loved you, because she stood beside you, that she was weak. You hid your greed behind my daughter's name." He leaned closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper, heavy with final judgment. "But you forgot something about shields, son. Shields are forged from steel, and when a shield stands up, the man hiding behind it has nowhere left to run." Brent stared at my father, then he looked at me. The smug confidence was gone. The charm had evaporated. What remained was a frightened man who finally understood he had destroyed something beyond repair. The lead agent stepped forward, pulling latex gloves from his pocket and snapping them on. "Mr. Caldwell, place your phone and your laptop on the table." Slowly. Brent hesitated. His eyes flicked to the phone in his pocket, then briefly to the window. For a moment, I thought he might try to fling it through the glass. "Now," the agent ordered, his hand drifting closer to his holster. Brent reached into his pocket. His hands shook violently as he pulled out the phone, nearly dropping it. He set it down beside the signed documents. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, panicked, pleading. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a hoarse whisper meant only for me. "Claire," he rasped, "you can't let this happen. This destroys everything, the company, the stock, my life. You don't have it in you to end me." I looked at him. At the man I had spent 18 years supporting. At the man who tried to turn me into a criminal to save himself. I rose slowly. I straightened the front of my dove-gray suit. My eyes were steady, dry, unwavering. I didn't whisper. I spoke clearly, making sure my father, the agents, and his mother heard every word. I already did Brent. I turned away and walked toward my father. I didn't look back as the agent stepped in to read him his rights. The 48 hours following the raid on Vanguard Ridge passed in a haze of controlled chaos, the kind usually reserved for disaster films. For me, though, they were the most structured days I'd had in years. For the first time, the disorder wasn't mine to contain. It belonged entirely to Brent. While he was processed at a federal detention facility, the Vanguard Ridge Board convened an emergency session. Without Brent there to manipulate the room, and with a looming federal indictment threatening the stock price, they turned on him instantly. The vote was unanimous. He was terminated for cause. His severance was revoked. His stock options were stripped away. Stonebridge Forensics delivered their full report to the board. The directors sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the documents I had flagged, every forged signature, every falsified compliance certificate, every diverted transfer. The seized servers confirmed it all. I wasn't just a whistleblower. I had conducted their internal audit for them. Miles didn't slow down. He filed an emergency motion in family court, submitting the federal warrant and Tessa's affidavit as proof that the divorce settlement had been secured through fraud, coercion, and criminal concealment of assets. Marilyn tried to confront me outside the courthouse, just before the emergency hearing. She looked diminished, nothing like the woman from 2 days earlier. Her Chanel suit was rumpled, and the venom in her eyes had been replaced with frantic desperation. "Claire, wait," she said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back sharply. "Do not touch me, Marilyn." "Listen to me," she whispered harshly, scanning the hallway to see if anyone was nearby. "We can still fix this. I can make this go away. I can get you real money. I have access to a trust the federal authorities don't know about yet. I can wire you $500,000 today. Just tell the judge you were mistaken. say you signed everything willingly." I looked at her with sincere pity. She still believed this was about money. She still thought every problem had a price. "It's finished, Marilyn," I said calmly. "Think about the family name," she begged. "Think about what this will do to us. I'll double it, $1 million. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recording I had made in my living room, the one where she bragged about hidden offshore accounts and mocked me for being naive. I pressed play. Her own voice echoed down the courthouse hallway, sharp, smug, unmistakable. "He has assets you couldn't even pronounce, completely invisible to U.S. tax law." The color drained from Marilyn's face until it resembled old ash. For a second, she didn't even seem to breathe. "If you ever come near me again," I said quietly, leaning closer, "I will play the rest of this recording for the IRS. I'm sure they'd be very interested in your definition of invisible." She staggered backward, her mouth opening and closing without sound, then turned and fled down the corridor. Inside the courtroom, the tension was electric. This was no longer a routine divorce proceeding. It was the public dismantling of a professional con. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses balanced on the tip of her nose, reviewed the emergency filings Miles had submitted. She examined the shell corporations. She studied the detailed timeline of the North Star transfers. Then came the final revelation, one I hadn't even known about until that morning. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, addressing the empty seat occupied only by his visibly sweating attorney, "it appears the marital residence awarded to Ms. Lopez contains a second lien." I blinked. I knew about the primary mortgage. I hadn't known about another. "According to these records," the judge continued coolly, "Mr. Caldwell opened a home equity line of credit against the property 3 weeks ago in the amount of $400,000. He then transferred those funds into an account held solely in his name." A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. He had stripped the equity from the house, left me with the debt, and walked away with the cash. It was so petty, so calculatedly cruel, that even the seasoned court reporter looked stunned. He hadn't just wanted to leave me with nothing. He had wanted to leave me underwater. "That constitutes bad faith," the judge said flatly, striking her gavel. Her ruling landed with finality. The original settlement was vacated immediately. She ordered a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, including offshore holdings. She froze Brent's remaining personal assets to secure my lawful share. She ordered him to either eliminate the liens on the house immediately or transfer equivalent liquid assets to cover the debt. Then she delivered the final blow. Given the extreme nature of Mr. Caldwell's conduct and his attempt to use this court to further criminal activity, he is ordered to pay 100% of Ms. Lopez's legal fees. I exited the courtroom, feeling lighter than I had in 2 decades. As I entered the lobby, federal marshals were escorting Brent from a side room where he had met with his attorney. He was now wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackles softly clinking around his wrists. He looked hollowed out. The polished golden image was gone, scrubbed away by fluorescent lights in consequence. He stopped when he saw me. The marshal tugged on his arm, but he resisted. "Claire," he said. His voice was rough. I paused. I didn't owe him anything, but I wanted him to see me one last time. "You ruined me," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I built an empire, I gave you everything, and you burned it all down, you destroyed me." I looked him squarely in the eye. I felt neither anger nor sorrow, only a profound sense of clarity. "No, Brent," I said, my tone steady and calm. "I did not destroy you. I simply stopped covering for you. You handled the rest yourself." The marshal pulled him away. He stumbled, shoulders slumping, and vanished through the heavy security doors. I turned toward the exit, standing near the glass doors, and saw my father. He wasn't in his formal suit today. He wore a simple rain jacket and casual pants. Less a general, more a dad. I approached him. In a movie, this would be the moment for a hug, a tearful reunion, a montage of 4 years of estrangement healed. But we were Lopez's. We didn't do montages. He studied me. He noticed how I stood back straight, chin high. He saw I hadn't broken under the pressure. "You handled that well in there," he said. "Thanks, Dad," I replied. He paused for a moment, then placed a solid, warm hand on my shoulder, squeezing firmly once. "You kept your composure," he said. "That's the hardest part." It was the highest compliment he could give. He opened the door and we stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The storm had passed, the air smelled of wet pavement and ozone. It was crisp, it was pure. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. For 18 years, I had made myself small so Brent could feel powerful. I had muted my voice so his could echo. I had hidden my intellect so he wouldn't feel threatened. But as I descended those steps, with the sun breaking through the clouds, I realized I no longer needed to shrink. The world was wide enough for me, just as I was. The story had ended, but my life was just beginning. Thank you so much for following my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to Justice After Dark for more real-life tales of karma, justice, and revelations. Like this video, share it with friends, and drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story travels.